Welcome back, and joining me now is Democratic Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut. Senator Murphy, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Yeah, great to be here.
Thank you for being here in person. We really appreciate it.
Sure.
I want to start off by talking to you, getting your reaction about President-elect Trump's decision to tap Kash Patel to lead the FBI. You just heard my conversation with Senator Haggerty. Do you know how you plan to vote on Patel's confirmation?
Oh, I will vote no, and I will organize not just my colleagues, but the American public to understand what's happening here. Donald Trump told the American public during the campaign that he was going to turn the Department of Justice into a political operation, an arm of the White House to destroy his political opponents, right? He said that the greatest threat to America is the enemy within, and who he said was the enemy within was us, was journalists, were his political opponents. Kash Patel's only qualification is because he agrees with Donald Trump that the Department of Justice should serve to punish, lock up, and intimidate Donald Trump's political opponents. And so the cost to the American public is pretty simple. The Department of Justice and the FBI is supposed to be there to go after drug traffickers, gun smugglers, to go after corrupt Wall Street financiers. Instead, the Department of Justice is going to serve Donald Trump's political interests. That's what Kash Patel has said he thinks the Department of Justice and the FBI should do, and that's why Republicans and Democrats should be examining how damaging this nomination could be to American democracy.
Well, let me zoom out and ask you more broadly about these nominees. Last weekend, Senator-elect Adam Schiff told me that Senator Marco Rubio was, quote, enormously well qualified to serve as Secretary of State, and that he was strongly inclined toward a yes vote on his confirmation. Can you see yourself supporting your fellow Senator Marco Rubio and any other picks of Donald Trump's?
Well, listen, I'll evaluate each nominee on their own merits. I thought it was kind of extraordinary that Senator Haggerty basically told you he is not going to ask a single question about any of these nominees. He is going to give Donald Trump carte blanche. That's an abdication of the Senate's responsibility. What worries me about this cabinet is that it is essentially putting the billionaire class in charge of American government. The net worth of Donald Trump's nominees is greater than 169 countries. The folks that are being nominated to run the Department of Commerce, Treasury, Education, they don't understand what regular people are going through. All they see government as good for is enriching themselves and their billionaire friends. And so that is what the story of this cabinet is Donald Trump and the billionaire class taking over government to enrich themselves and screw everybody else in this country.
All right, let me take a little bit of a turn. I want to ask you about what happened on Thanksgiving. You and the rest of the Connecticut delegation, quite frankly, received bomb threats at your homes. Yep. Now, fortunately, they were investigated. There were no actual bombs, but they did echo threats that have been made to some of the picks that President-elect Trump has made for his cabinet. On a human level, Senator, what was your reaction to learning that, and what have you learned about who might be behind these threats?
Well, as you know, there were threats, very similar threats made the day before to Trump's cabinet nominees. It appeared on Thanksgiving morning. It was Democrats that were targeted. My sense is that this is some outside actor just trying to create confusion and distraction inside the American political system. And listen, I want a Department of Justice. I want an FBI director who's going to go after anybody that tries to threaten the American political system, that goes after Republicans or Democrats. One of the things that I'm concerned about is that Kash Patel is going to only care about protecting Republicans and not care about protecting every single member of the American population, every single one of us who occasionally gets met with these kind of threats.
Let me turn to tariffs now. I want to get your reaction to that big headline of this week. President-elect Trump threatening to impose tariffs against Canada, Mexico, China. We should note that President Biden has actually kept some of the Trump tariffs in place and built on them, has imposed new tariffs as well. Do you think that tariffs are good policy?
Well, what we know is that Donald Trump has no idea how to use tariffs in order to create American jobs. He did impose tariffs during his 4 years in office, and we lost manufacturing jobs. Joe Biden knew how to use tariffs in coordination with subsidies and incentives for domestic manufacturing, such that while he was president, we grew manufacturing jobs. The headline here is that Donald Trump's entire economic policy is going to be about a massive tax break for those billionaires that are in charge of his cabinet. The tariffs are a distraction from what the real agenda is going to be able to use government in order to dramatically increase the wealth of his cabinet and the friends of that cabinet. Those tariffs, if they're not used properly, are just going to raise costs on ordinary Americans while the billionaires get off scot-free.
Well, and that takes me to my next question, which is that economists of all stripes say that tariffs, regardless of how they're imposed, do ultimately hike up prices for consumers. So if they're so bad, why didn't President Biden roll back the Trump-era tariffs?
Because President Biden did this the right way. He imposed restrictions, for instance, on electric vehicles coming into the United States and the technology connected to electric vehicles, while also giving subsidies to American electric vehicle companies. That's the kind of coordinated policy that ends up in hundreds of thousands of new manufacturing jobs being created in the United States. Donald Trump engages in sort of thoughtless, insane tariff policy that ends up in prices going up, but jobs not being created in the United States. So you've got to use tariffs in the right way. And if you use them the right way, it can create jobs. But Donald Trump is going to talk about tariffs because he doesn't want you to know about the primary centerpiece of his economic agenda, which is a tax cut for billionaires and millionaires and corporations.
Last week, Senator, you put out a memo about the 2024 election. You had some strong language talking about what you believe went wrong. You said the party needs to embrace a more populist message. What do you think Democrats need to do differently in order to win, in order to be in a fighting position in 2028 and also the midterms?
Yeah, well, listen, I think we have to talk about power, who has it and who doesn't have it. I think some of the most important things that Joe Biden did were taking on the big corporations, going after their monopoly power, helping consumers with some of the really egregious fees and gimmicks that those companies use to hurt us. I wish the Biden campaign and the Biden White House and the Harris campaign talked more about what they did to break up corporate power. So I think Democrats need to be much more aggressive in making this case that power has been concentrated and it needs to be returned to regular Americans, and that we need to be able to invite a lot of different Americans into that conversation, regardless of whether they line up with Democrats on every single social and cultural issue. Let's build a bigger tent.
Senator, very quickly, Nancy Pelosi says that President Biden stayed in this race too long. He should have gotten out sooner. Do you agree with that assessment, just very quickly?
Well, listen, in hindsight, knowing that he ultimately made the decision to stand down, yes, of course, it would have been better for President Biden to have made that decision earlier. I think there's no question about it.
Okay. Senator Murphy, thank you so much for being here. Great to see you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.